What does it look like to be at the wrong place at the wrong time? Well, look no further than the movie Wreck, or Record, or Red Dot Wreck. As a news crew was following the fire department and is sent out to an area of Barcelona late in the night, they arrive to already find something has begun to affect the residents of this apartment. Reporting that they heard inhuman shrieking from the third floor, the residents gathered downstairs and awaited for more police to show up. However, what would end up happening would come in the form of a quarantine. As the dwindling crew left alive continues to search for an escape, they continue to find more and more clues about what's happening. The outbreak of this disease is spreading throughout the apartment complex quickly, and everyone is suspect. But what exactly is this disease? Where did it come from, and what are the effects it has on the human physiology? Well, let's discuss that in today's episode. So as per usual, for all those that have seen the movie and don't want a recap, skip the timestamp up on screen to bypass. But if you want to stick around and watch the summary because you actually haven't seen it yet, or you just want to help out watch time, I definitely won't be complaining about that. We start off our video with a hot Spaniard woman who back in 2007 is really the only reason I even remember this movie. 15-year-old Roanoke, classic. Anyhow, as they are discussing, they are there to follow a crew of firefighters and EMTs. After being shown around the entire building, which I have to add, I did ride-alongs as an EMT for a while when I was getting certified, and man, this is a nice station, more so in the middle of a city. But I digress. As the night seems to be going nowhere, the news crew is there to film a show called While You Were Sleeping. And while you were sleeping, there is a call that goes out about an old woman named Mrs. Izquierdo, which I'm pretty sure I just pronounced that like crap, who is trapped in her apartment and is shrieking at the top of her lungs. As the fire department rushes out, they approach the building with sirens off and notice the police have already arrived at the scene. Heading in the apartment building, they find that all the residents are a little freaked out on the lower levels of the lobby. They agree that they need to head up and check on the woman, which you'd actually be surprised how much the fire department gets called out for, say, like a mental break or someone suffering from psychosis. It's pretty common, actually. As they move into the woman's apartment, they find her standing in the corner in the dark. And I gotta tell you, if I was ever on a call like this, I would probably immediately turn around and leave. The police officer approaches her first and tries to get her to come with them, to which she ends up becoming exceedingly aggressive, jumps on the officer, and then bites him in the neck. Getting all the way down to what appears to be the jugular, since it's a low pressure bleed, they carry away the officer downstairs and attempt to stop the bleeding. When trying to get back to their trucks, however, to attend to the officer, they find that the building has been quarantined off by police and military on the outside, who immediately begin telling them to stay inside the building. With the officer continuing to bleed, they quickly ask anyone if they're a doctor, to which they find a medical assistant who is able to help stave off the blood loss. As they're trying to figure out what to do, one firefighter has remained upstairs with the old woman to sort of talk her down as well as keep an eye on her. A scream can be heard as Alex is then thrown over the banister by the old woman and is critically injured. And judging by the landing location and the blood, that's definitely a skull fracture, and his face will likely never look the same after that. The remaining officer, news crews, and firefighters head upstairs to contain the woman. As they re-enter the apartment, a young woman is seen crawling across the walls and ground before succumbing to her wounds. Mrs. Aguero then runs towards the officers upon hearing them again, which Sergio is then forced to take her out with a few shots, although this only temporarily works. Everyone then exits the apartment and heads back down to pool in the lower levels. The news crew immediately begins to interview everyone and getting their take on what happened, and begin picking up bits of information that things were happening well before the night began. One of the interviewees is a little girl named Jennifer. Her mother claims that she needs to get out of here because her daughter has tonsillitis and she needs her antibiotics or she will continue to get more and more sick. While interviewing her, she claims that her dog Max is sick at the vet as well, but it is not known if this is connected, but you already know that I'm going to connect that later, so just stick around till after the summary. As everyone continues to try to find a way out, the building is getting more and more locked down as every possible exit is sealed. A call can be heard outside saying that they will be sending in a health officer shortly to assess the situation and talk to everyone. Blood will then be taken from everyone inside and checked for contamination. Upon his arrival, he makes his way towards those who were injured by the already infected. He immediately begins treatment on them, however, in the process, they begin to become aggressive, much like Mrs. Izquierdo. As everyone flees while trying not to get bit, they end up locking the infected in a textile shop at the base of the apartment. Having a second to breathe, the health inspector begins to explain what is happening to everyone as he makes the connection this disease may have come from the dog. Knowing that the little girl was quite clearly in the presence of the dog for a while, they begin to turn towards the little girl to figure out what exactly is she sick with. The mother mother explains again that she just has tonsillitis as the residents then confront her. In the middle of this, Jennifer fully turns and then attacks the mother. She ends up vomiting blood in her face and then flees upstairs, shrieking the entire time. Before taking off after the little girl, Sergio then handcuffs the mother to the stairs in case she ends up turning as well, as transference of the disease is not well known at this point. Sergio, Manu, and Pablo all run upstairs chasing after the little girl. When they find Jennifer, she ends up biting Sergio, who then realizes that he's basically done for at this point. He tells the others to leave him and lock him in. During this, they come into the stairwell and find that the remaining healthy residents are all hoofing it upstairs, and the mom is just basically being eaten at the bottom of the stairs. The infected had broken out of the warehouse area and were flooding in. All this is in vain, however, and they are all captured one by one, bitten, and infected. While discussing ways to get out, eventually the hazmat guy reveals that he has actually been bitten as well and will turn soon. He locks himself behind a gate, proclaiming that it won't hold permanently. As he slowly succumbs to his wounds, the group attempts to figure out what to do and where to go for their escape. They come to the conclusion that there is a drain that leads to the sewers at the base of the apartment. It's their best bet, but they need a key to get in. While discussing this, however, one of the members of the group is grabbed by the recently turned health officer and bitten on the scalp, securing his infection. The remaining Angela, Pablo, and Manu take off to find the key that will allow them to escape and survive. While ascending the stairs, however, Manu is then bitten outside the apartment of the key's location. He doesn't mention it, but says that he will hold this spot. After searching the apartment, they head back out and discover that all the residents, including Manu, now have a taste for blood. This forces them back into the penthouse to seek shelter, and this would prove to be a very bad idea. Entering the penthouse, it becomes clear that there is something wrong in here that has been going on. All over are pictures of religious symbols mixed with the occasional medical equipment and very little explanation as to who was here and why. They know from earlier there was a man, but he was never actually home, or he came home very little, sometimes with months of time in between visits. Finding a tape recorder, they get a better idea of what's going on. The recording mentions that a man was an agent of the Vatican and that he was charged with the task of isolating the enzyme responsible for a young Portuguese woman's apparent possessing. It was assumed demons had entered her and then turned her into this monster. Through this work, however, it becomes apparent that while attempting to treat her, the enzyme mutated and became extremely contagious. Knowing that she could no longer be saved, he sealed the woman in the house to meet her end via starvation. However, in the eternalized words of Ian Malcolm, life finds a way. While searching the penthouse for some sort of escape or really anything, they see the attic door open. A little boy who was infected was also trapped up here and breaks the camera light in the process of smacking it. Left in the darkness, Pablo quickly turns on the night vision and him and Angela move slowly through the penthouse in total darkness. As they do, Tristana, a Portuguese woman, makes her way through. Completely emaciated and dazed, she appears to be on the verge of starvation, and as she moves around, she's also seen holding a hammer. Angela and Pablo try to escape, but Pablo ends up making too much noise and then has his head bashed in with the hammer by Tristana. Angela recovers the camera and then looks through the screen and sees that Tristana is actually eating Pablo at this point. She panics, trips, drops the camera, and the camera continues to record. While dragging herself forward, Angela is then dragged away by Tristana, presumably to suffer the same fate and become a woman witch. Nailed it. So what in the name of all that is holy or unholy is going on here? First, I would like to say after watching Quarantine as well, it would appear as though copyright laws are not universally accepted on this planet, clearly, because it's almost a straight rip of Record. But what Quarantine does have going for it is scientific validity, whereas Record is just kind of strange in the sense that there's also like a supernatural element to it. So let's get to what this disease does first. It would appear as though the main ways this disease is transmitted are by bites and blood, which means saliva is on the table as far as a transmission vector, which is pretty evident based on everyone who was bitten and turned. This would also likely indicate that all bodily fluids are a potential media in which to transfer this disease. When the little girl throws up blood on the mother's face, I can only assume that the mother would have been infected at this point. On top of this, the disease seems to be able to spread regardless of species, as when the dog was infected with the same disease as everyone else. This is fairly interesting. It may actually just be a mammalian disease as opposed to a specific animal type. We see though in the little girl specifically that there is an immune response within people. Like I said, the little girl does have tonsillitis, which means her body was actively fighting whatever was infecting her. Another more grosser aspect though is if you read the comics, Tristana was actually forced to do the do, which is how she initially contracted this mystery illness. So the question is, what exactly is this disease? Well, as the health officer discussed, it was a form of rabies, but they weren't actually sure as to why it was so contagious. However, the Vatican agent from the tape recording goes on to say it was actually a demonic enzyme in a form of possession, which I gotta say, just what? Like literally what? Let's take a look at this this disease progression real quick, because what? There first appears to be a variance amongst those who are infected, which would indicate biology plays a huge factor in how this infection progresses. After being bitten, the officer with the neck bite succumbs in hours to the disease and turns. As he turns, we see physically he begins to convulse, his eyes roll up in the back of his head, and then he gets up and starts attacking. With the little girl, however, she has apparently been sick for a while, enough time to go to the doctor and get prescribed medication for this actual disease to boot. We also hear the medical officer discusses how blood type may also affect how the infection spreads and how long it takes. Oh, by the way, time for a little bit of a side tangent. Have you ever wondered why we have different blood types? Seems pretty strange, right? I mean, what's the point? Well, actually, did you know that different blood types can outright naturally make you more resistant to certain diseases? It's an interesting fact that's actually overlooked by a lot of people. The reason is because as your ancestors evolved in certain areas of the planet, they were subjected to different viruses, bacteria, parasites, and over time, their blood changed and adapted, much like the rest of the human body would to any environment. Due to this, changes within the blood help people resist and combat diseases that others may fall to in mere days. Pretty interesting. Anyhow, this may actually be an explanation to this disease in the movie. They say children are more resistant, but we really only see one example of this, and it's not really an indicator that this child can last longer in the presence of this virus or bacteria or anything than adults would. It's entirely possible that the girl simply had a different blood type, therefore she was better equipped at dealing with a similar virus which her body may actually have recognized, whereas the few adults in there did not have this potential resistance. Again, however, as we can see, this resistance doesn't mean much, and they are still turned in the long run. But as this disease progresses further, we begin to see it take its toll on the body. In the little girl's case, she throws up blood, which would indicate that the stomach is bleeding and likely esophageal or lung tissue degradation has begun to form. We also see in her eyes that they are turning red as blood vessels burst, turning the sclera red around the iris. So now we know this virus does damage to the blood vessels, but another thing that can't be overlooked is the tonsillitis. You know what really affects salivary glands and makes it look like tonsillitis? Straight up rabies. You know what can jump species from human to dog and vice versa? Straight up rabies. And you know what can make you aggressive and have violent outbursts? You guessed it, straight up rabies. And you know, okay, you get it. But as the medical officer himself says, this seems to be simply a form of rabies that is not understood. Symptom-wise, it doesn't just add up, it fits to a T. Rabies can be transmitted by salivary glands through bites. It can also presumably, if throw up blood, that can be mixed with saliva, and then that enters another person's mucosa membranes, and this would cause a positive infection status. The only thing that doesn't quite make sense is how did it get downstairs? Well, look no further than our good friends, the vermin that have been with us since pretty much the beginning, rats. I believe that rats becoming infected initially and then infecting the dog spread this disease further than the room upstairs. And here's the thing that makes me sort of scratch my head, and I found kind of annoying, to be honest. Look, I get it. Humans are superstitious. It's a way for us to explain what was out there back when we huddled around fires and hunted with spears. You could arguably say superstition, belief in religion, all of that is ingrained in us, and without getting too philosophical on it, that's what makes us human. But why in the name of all that is holy would you send a Vatican agent to handle a purely biological disease crisis? He then goes on to say that it's a demonic enzyme. Excuse me, what? You mean it's a virus that we have that is clearly mutagenic, as he puts it? How does this have to do with anything demonic at all, or possession? These are quantifiable symptoms with a literal disease that explains what it is. This is the part of the movie that just totally lost me. We get it, demon's scary. But you know what's probably scarier? A literal virus that mutates out of control that we can't get in front of to stop, that can easily jump species and turn hosts into bloodthirsty monsters. Alright, I'm getting off my soapbox. Internally, the host would be a wreck, but what I find most interesting is the longevity of the body under these conditions. With a virus coursing through the meat suit, it's clear that stressors on it would be tremendous, more so concerning blood loss. With the blood vessels being attacked, this means that the brain would also be under attack, and brain damage would be mounting quite quickly. With the standard symptoms of meningitis setting in and putting pressure on the brain, the person may become more aggressive as a result. And we see this in the movie. This also affects the part of the brains responsible for self-preservation, which would decrease host longevity. I would imagine this person would drop a lot sooner than the movie lets on. Tristana may have had a less aggressive, more stable form of the disease initially, one that maybe wouldn't have torn up her body so much, but through experimentation by the Vatican agent, the disease would mutate, and as a result, the residents were infected with a much more volatile and aggressive form, meaning that they would likely not last as long as the initial host. So what is the disease? Well, I really just believe it to be a form of rabies, granted one that we haven't seen before, and with the symptoms actually coming on a lot quicker from bites transferring this disease would be something interesting to see. But its ability to jump from humans to dogs and back to humans, this would likely mutate it in a certain way, making it possibly more lethal to humans as it picks up new tricks from new hosts. The disease leaves the brain inflamed with the meninges around the brain swelling, thus putting more pressure on it, causing further damage, ultimately leading this person to losing their humanity in the process as the cerebrum decays. I don't believe it to be demonic in nature, however. That part seems completely ridiculous to me, and really it's just kind of there for the 3 spooky 5 me factor.